All right, y'all. Welcome to Blacks with Power. This first episode of 2018. Happy New Year's to you. I'm Father Jabril Valentine, and this is the show for you all who are trying to find, hoping to find, looking to find that way to find a faith that helps you to transcend white supremacy and end the oppression, so that Black lives can matter in this country, in this world. I am joined today. We will be talking with a brother, another brother of mine, not one of my fraternity's brothers this time, but one of my clergy brothers. Orlando Addison is an award-winning Episcopal priest and founder of the Ernesto Gamboa Project. Born to Jamaican parents in Tela, Honduras, he developed an affinity for literature and embraced Afro-Latino causes from a young age. Orlando founded the Ernesto Gamboa Project back in 2017 and is actively involved in Afro-Latino issues around the country. And he is using the Ernesto Gamboa Project to serve as a platform for Afro-Latino community issues and to share the many dynamic aspects of its culture, to raise the profile of Afro-Latinos, and to inspire other Afro-Latinos to celebrate their own uniqueness. Orlando has written for the Nuevo Herald, and other Hispanic newspaper, and he uses his Afro-Latino experiences as an inspiration for his writing. What he did not give me to read, but what I read elsewhere, just because I'm nosy, is he's written about 3 other books, both in Spanish and in English. A prolific writer. Orlando, how are you, brother?
I'm very well, my brother. Very well. Thank you very much for inviting me to be on your show today. I'm excited.
Oh man, I am excited as well. Those of you who have been listening for a while may have heard me talk about being a staffer for a member of Congress. I was a communications director, actually special assistant for communications for Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney from Atlanta, Georgia, Decatur, where it's greater, 4th District of Georgia. And one of the things under my purview was Afro-Latino issues. And so it is huge for me to have this conversation and introduce this concept to you all out there, because a lot of the times Afro-Latinos get overlooked. We fail to remember how large the Afro-Latino population is. We fail to remember that Brazil has the most Africans in the Western Hemisphere, then America, then Colombia, or is it Venezuela? Or is it Venezuela or Colombia? I can't remember which one.
Yeah, it's Colombia, then Venezuela.
Colombia, then Venezuela, on down. But the lion's share of Africans in the West reside in the Latin America. And so we do ourselves a disservice. I was talking to Orlando earlier and saying that Marcus Messiah Garvey, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, founder of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, used to say all the time, we are not outnumbered, only outorganized. And we do ourselves a disservice when we don't understand the power in numbers that comes when we understand the issues of and join ourselves to the cultures of the Africans in the diaspora in Latin America, in the Caribbean, and in Latin America in particular. And that's why we're having Father Orlando on. Brother, I want to start with something a little light, but a little interesting. I found it interesting. I mean, I kind of understand how it happens. I kind of alluded to it a minute ago. But like you said, born to Jamaican parents in Honduras. How does that happen?
Yes, well, I guess to answer that directly, I'll have to ask my parents about that. Anyway, the way it happened is that in the time, in the perhaps the early 1900s, late 1800s, the banana company, they were looking for workers skilled workers to work in the fields, and they encountered in Honduras many of the native Hondurans who were unable to work in the banana plantation. They did not have the skills to work in the banana plantations. And the second part of, they did not speak the language that the banana companies that based in the United States spoke, which was English. So they decided then to go to the Caribbean islands to get workers who had the knowledge, the skills, to work in plantation after working in the sugar plantation in Jamaica and other places. And when those jobs were closing down and or brothers and sisters down there had no job, the banana company then is send out ships and brought them over. And this is how my grandparents came over to Honduras from my father's side as well as my mother's side.
Yeah. I wanted to bring that out because that was that was one of the things that Garvey saw as well, right? So Garvey went
Yes.
over and the Garvey movement was huge in like Honduras and Nicaragua and Panama
Mhm.
and so on and so forth because he understood that that's where all of the Black Caribbean natives were going,
Yeah.
and so so I that's why I said I alluded to it earlier, but I wanted to
Mhm.
draw that out for people because here it is that if not for that, you would not be an Afro-Latino, right?
That is correct. That's correct. In my particular case, yes.
Right.
However, but many of the of brothers and sisters in Latin America did not necessarily come from the island itself. They were basically direct descendants of former slaves
Right.
that became freed. Like for example, in Brazil,
Yeah.
it's a huge example of that. And
The
Colombia,
majority
as
of
you
those
mentioned
in
before,
Brazil came from Angola, if I remember. Came direct
that's
from
correct.
Angola.
That's correct. Yes, that's correct. And so, so my experience in being descendant of Jamaica is different from many of
Right.
the brothers and sisters in Latin America.
Yeah, and I think that experience brings perspective because you had to grow up as an Afro-Latino, you did, and you had to
Yes,
embrace Afro-Latino culture, you did, and you
correct.
also had this Afro-Caribbean culture,
That's
that,
right.
that had to
Yeah.
be embraced and meshed and reconciled, and so how did that form? How did that shape? How do you reconcile those two identities?
Well, at the beginning, it was very difficult. One, because back home, the only education about the Black culture came from home, and the little knowledge and information that my mother and parents had is what they shared with us. But in school, we did not get any kind of you know knowledge or information, even history of Black people in Latin America. The only information we got, basically in high school and in college, was that Black people came from Africa and they were enslaved, and that basically it. And most of the information was basically negative. It was more
Mm-hmm.
derogative. It was more humiliating kind of information that we got. It was nothing about the heroes, nothing about the men and women who fought for independence for these countries, nothing like that. We learned. So most of the information, the little information we had, came from home. So it was really hard to find your identity.
Mm-hmm.
You grew up in this Hispanic culture with Hispanic language, um, and it's like you was hard to find your real identity, who you really were at that particular time. You're Black. You speak a different language. Your culture is completely different, but at the same time, um, that culture and history have been denied, and you don't know necessarily who you are. So it was basically an internal battle, at least in my case, an internal battle to find my real identity
Mm-hmm.
until I started to do my own personal research and my family background, and then reading, in terms of the some of the history of the Black Latinos, that I begun to really embrace and love and learn more about the culture.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. As I'm listening to you, what I keep thinking about is how similar that is to the Black American experience, to
Mhm.
my experience growing up in the Caribbean, where in the Caribbean we did hear a lot more about our identity, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because in the Caribbean most of the white folks had left.
Yeah, yeah,
and so
exactly.
and so blacks were in control of what was shared, and so we learned about the slave revolts and so on and so forth, and we had
Mhm.
more of an understanding of our heroes. But in my particular case, being a black person born in the U.S., born in Detroit, Michigan, but raised in the Caribbean, but also raised in a Caribbean that has the dubious distinction of being quasi-Caribbean, quasi-American, being in the American colony of the Virgin Islands. My Caribbean heritage was strong. I understood that. But the same deal with my Black American heritage, it's like, you didn't learn anything about, even in this Caribbean island with all black educators, right? You still did not learn about, the black heroes, because when you get the textbooks, it's not in there, so you don't learn anything about your identity. And it's not until, like you said, it's not until you begin to do your own research, your own homework, connect with the old heads in your family and learn from them and hear the stories from them, that you start to get that sense of self. And so I appreciate you sharing that, because it helps us understand the connectivity between our plight. We Black Americans tend to think that we're the only ones out here in the West. We don't know what to do with a black person like you that can speak fluent Spanish, and speak it not as somebody that learned it in their adult years or in college or in high school, but speaking as somebody who spoke it from the time they were born, growing up, speaking it. First words were probably Spanish, that kind of level. Like, you don't exist to us, and so I think a lot of our power is lost. And I think that brings us to the work of the Gamboa Project, right? Tell us about the Gamboa Project, how you came to that, and what that's all about. That's thegamboaproject.com. We're going to put the link to the site on the blog post for this episode. But tell us about the formation of the Gamboa Project, what that's all about, and what's your hopes for that.
Well, thank you. The Gamboa Project, the Ernesto Gamboa Project, started with the novel that I published a couple of years ago. The novel is the character there is Ernesto Gamboa, who is an Afro-Honduran assassinated by the Honduran government for his political views, which was basically absolutely different from the establishment, from the political establishment. And so he was trying to change the culture. He was trying to change the social aspect of Honduras by involving the poor, by bringing the Afro-Honduran community to light, from invisibility to visible. In fact, there is part of in the novel that the people in high power were discussing the concept of, this individual, this Negro, by using the N-word here,
right?
It's too dangerous. We already have a U.S. president who is black, and they were saying we don't want one like that here in our country. So we need to find ways to get rid of this person who is now being raised from the grassroots as a potential candidate to the presidency. And so that basically generated the idea of killing him. And so he's shot and he's killed, but he wakes up and he sees his body lying there on the platform where he was assassinated, and he begins to go into the crowd, but the crowd doesn't recognize him. Even his own family doesn't recognize him. He goes to his own funeral and no one recognizes him. He sees his body lying there in the casket, and he tries to communicate with people, but everybody ignores him. Now that has a purpose, and the purpose of it is that Ernesto Gamboa, as he walks in this society, in this world, without being recognized, is the representation of who Blacks and Afro-Latinos are. We are so invisible. We walk in this world. We are in this society, but nobody knows us.
Right.
Nobody sees us. Nobody identifies us. Even though we can say, "Oh, I'm Black." Yeah, but you're Hispanic, so you don't count. Kind of situation.
Right.
So the Ernesto Gamboa Project was born out of that concept of trying to create it's an initiative that will create a platform to help the Afro-Latino community come out of the invisibility to a more visible part in our society.
Okay.
And that's what we're doing.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And so you all check out the website, thegamboaproject.com. You'll see a lot of great information telling you more about the Gamboa Project, the vision for it, how they're trying to draw out Afro-Latinos to make them more visible, to celebrate Afro-Latino culture. What a lot of people don't know is that a lot of Latin American culture was born out of Afro-Latino culture. A lot of the music, a lot of the dance,
Yes.
you know, the wonderful music of Cuba, the wonderful music of Puerto Rico, very distinctly African. You know,
Yes.
they came
Yes.
from
Yes.
African culture. Of
Yes.
course, you don't see the Africans playing it when you see it here in America, but
right.
those things came out of African culture. So, what are you doing to highlight Afro-Latino culture? Why do you think highlighting Afro-Latino culture is important? And why should I care as a non-Afro-Latino?
Well, what we're doing is, again, the Ernesto Gamboa Project is this platform that was created to project, to help, not only in terms of the political and the social aspect of the Afro-Latino community, but also the cultural part of it, and that is promoting the music, promoting the dance, and many other areas of the Afro-Latino community. And you're right. Most of the music, like salsa, for example, merengue from Dominican Republic, salsa from Puerto Rico and Cuba, and recently discovered by scholars that tango in Argentina was basically produced by Afro-Argentinians who are now coming out to the light. So we are here to basically let people know, you know what, Latin America is more than what you see. There is a component of Africans, the African culture behind everything you hear, most of everything you hear in Latin America, music and culture, then that is projected in our culture and society. Why should African Americans care? Well, because first of all, we all came from the same place. We all came from the same, from the same continent, and we all brought different culture. In fact, many of the slaves that came to the United States, they were bought in Latin America. They were bought in the Dominican Republic and the island and Cuba and all those places and shipped to the United States. So there is a connection. There is a relationship there. So I think we also care because it's we all have the same background, cultural background. Many of us or our ancestors were slaves, fought for liberation, and now today we're all fighting to become visible in our society and be accepted in our society.
So tell me about this. This is something I was thinking about as I'm listening to you, right? I see more similarities, right? And this is what this is all about, y'all. It's drawing out the similarities between our cultural experiences, even though our culture is different, right? So here it is. You talk about Afro-Latinos working to reclaim their culture, right? And their contributions to Latin American culture, right? And at the same time, in the same way, maybe we're a little further ahead. Who knows? You know what I mean? But Black Americans trying to reclaim their culture, and reassert their contributions to American culture, in terms of who really created rock and roll, in terms of, the contributions of hip hop music to everything, not just music, but also style and fashion and, and the arts and, how the contributions of graffiti to the arts and, the contributions of slang and to language and trying to reclaim that. What would you say, and because of your work, what would you say? Why is it important for Afro-Latinos, African Americans, Afro whatever, to reclaim their contributions to the society that they're in?
Well, I think because we have been denied. First of all, we have not been recognized for the work that we've done and our ancestors have done. at least with the Afro-Latino community, it has been we have not played any role in society at all. I mean, according to the people that create the agenda,
Right. Right.
we have been completely excluded from from society itself, from our contribution to society. So yeah, we're fighting for not only to regain our identity, but also to let people know that we and our ancestors have contributed to the development of society, and that it's time for society to really acknowledge that, to give us a place where we belong in society, not in the back of the bus or behind the bus, but sitting together,
Right.
working together, and creating an agenda together. And that's having somebody else dictate the agenda, but us sitting at the table and really contributing and sharing our history, our culture, and all the other elements that are necessary to help us be more visible in the community.
Yeah, because when they deny our contributions to the building of society, they can also deny us our place in society. They can also
Correct.
reinforce the narrative that we are inferior, that we don't
Right.
belong, that we cannot handle certain things, that we cannot do certain things because we have not done anything.
Yeah.
But if you
Yeah.
have to actually look at the fact of all that we have done and all that you have just stolen from us and laid
Hmm.
claim to because you find how valuable it is, when we are able to effectively reclaim that, it's hard to deny us our seat at the table.
That's correct.
Our
That's correct.
our full seat at the table.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and so and that just spills, and then that spills over from culture, and this to me is why it's important. It spills over from culture into civic life. It spills over from
Hmm.
culture. Our culture is what gives us the seat at the table, the full seat at the table, and now we have power to make decisions. Now we have
Correct.
power to set the agenda, like you said.
Hmm.
Who's setting the agenda? Now we
Hmm.
have, because we have a full seat at the table, we have power to set the agenda, and it brings me to something that we were talking about before we got started on this show. When it comes to politics, we all know America runs the world, at least for now, and it seems like China is rearing its head and so
Hmm.
on and so forth. But, for now, America is the world's superpower, right? And
Right. Right.
so, like Egypt of old, an African country, y'all, don't let the sub-Saharan peace and the northern Saharan whatever fool you. It's still on Africa. They haven't moved
That's
it.
right. Exactly.
But everyone came to Egypt for assistance. We read about that in Genesis,
Hmm.
with Joseph, and everyone came from all the nations in order to get assistance from Egypt. Everyone comes from all the nations to get assistance from America. America sets the agenda. We understand that. Whether we like it, whether we don't like it, it doesn't matter. We understand that reality. When we
Correct.
talk about politics, when we don't understand the connectivity, when we don't even understand the existence of Afro-Latinos,
Hmm. Hmm.
especially we Black Americans, who every marginalized group comes to for assistance in getting their agenda moved forward. The LGBTQ, the Hispanic, everyone comes to Black Americans and like, we need y'all to rubber stamp our struggle so that we can pimp the civil rights movement and benefit. And, we always are like, yeah, we'll help you out. And the Hispanic community comes, and we were talking about this 9 times out of 10, a lot of the issues that the Hispanic community wants addressed don't really speak to the needs of the Afro-Latinos, right?
Correct.
So
That's correct.
how does that come into play? Like, how do we even get to understand that? How do we even get to, beyond understanding that, how do we get to understand the Afro-Latino perspective and how that should be shaping our approach as Blacks in America, wherever we're from, but Blacks who have, voice and vote in America? How does that help? Should that shape the way that we engage these issues?
Well, I don't know. For example, if you notice, every year we have been celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month.
Mm-hmm.
One of the issues I have, and many of us Afro-Latinos have, is that we are completely ignored during the celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. You don't see anyone that looks like me on television. You don't see anyone that looks like me during the celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month that talks about the contribution of the Black Hispanics. There's nothing no history, nothing at all. I mean, we are completely like we don't exist, in during the celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. So what we're trying to do is to basically change the narrative, change the agenda, and we understand now. A couple of us who are involved in either nonprofit organizations or in business and initiatives such as the Ernesto Gamboa, we understand that we cannot just sit and wait for others to really shape the agenda for us. If we don't do it on our own, no one else is going to do it.
Right.
If we want people to know our history, then we have to do something about it.
Right.
We have to tell our story. We have to find the media, the medium to really share the narrative, share our struggles, share our culture. Because if we don't do it, no one else is going to do it. And I think it's the same thing that happens with the African Americans. That if African Americans don't really step up, I mean, and really try to create the agenda, then nothing going to happen. I mean, for example,
right.
I mean, the civil rights movement. If Martin Luther King did not do anything about it, do you think that today our society would be talking about, the success of the? I mean, I read and heard in many cases in terms of there were a lot of Black people, African Americans, who disagreed with Martin Luther King's movement.
Right.
They disagreed with his vision.
Right.
Because they apparently they couldn't see what Martin Luther King saw.
Right.
But imagine if he and those who were part of the civil rights movement, if they did not really, didn't stand up for what they believe and achieve what they really achieved in today's society, we wouldn't be talking about it.
Right.
So they basically said, you are no longer, designing or creating the agenda for us. We are now going to be sitting at the table, and we are going to be shaping the agenda that will include us, our history, our ancestors, and everything that we contributed. So that's the similarity that we have, the Afro-Latinos with the African Americans.
Yeah. I think that's an important point to draw out as we start looking for ways to have more connectivity, because we're more effective that way. We are more organized that way when I mean I think of things like, and we haven't talked about this, so I don't know if we're prepared to go in any detail in this, but I think about these immigration debates. I think about DACA. I think about all of these immigration issues. And have we been paying? And of course, we support dreamers. You know what I mean? We don't want people to be just thrown out of the country that they know. This is the only thing that they've known. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And have we looked closely, and we should look closely at how do these things affect the Black Latinos, the Afro-Latinos? How does the immigration debate, the diversity visa debate, affect Black Latinos, Afro-Latinos? How does all of these things, understanding that it's not just quote unquote Hispanic, because when you get into these Hispanic countries, a lot of the times the Black Hispanics are marginalized too. So we ultimately end up supporting those who are marginalizing ourselves.
Exactly correct. That is exactly right. Many Afro-Latinos find it very difficult to get out. One of the reasons has to do with the fact that many of them are living in very isolated area, and an area that's considered to be, a poor area. Like the ghetto, for example, to use a word here, in many of the countries of Latin America. Many are really coming out of that area by getting education. I mean, most of the colleges and universities in Latin America are now getting many Afro-Latinos going to school to get an education, and that helps them to apply for a visa and then come here to the United States. But you have the majority of them that don't have access to those privileges that it's a small number of people has, and by isolating the entire Latinos, you're also isolating those who already been isolated by their own culture and people, which is the Afro-Latino community.
Right.
You know, it's a double. The Afro-Latino community experienced double isolation.
Right. Right. You know, something that you just said when you talked about colleges here in America bringing in Afro-Latinos, right? Mm-hmm. These universities ain't slick. You know, they bring in Afro-Latinos because they aren't black like the blacks here, but we can still say that we got black folk on campus. So how does or do you do anything about this through the Gamboa Project? How does the Gamboa Project help Afro-Latinos to make connections with the African American community so that you don't have, for instance, Afro-Latinos coming from Latin America going to school in the U.S. and not associating with the Black Americans? Now, don't get me wrong, it happens both ways, you know? Like when I came from the Caribbean, we didn't associate with the Black Americans because we were fed a narrative that you ain't want to be like Black Americans, right? So we kept away from them. And similarly, Black Americans had their own issues with Caribbean people, you know what I mean? And so we both had this narrative, and both needs to be undone. But so with these Afro-Latinos that are coming to the U.S. in order to go to school, so on and so forth, do you have any things that you all do to, or do any, or even if you don't have any things that you do presently, any ideas on how the Gamboa Project steps in to help bridge those divides?
First of all, there is a problem right now with the Afro-Latino community, and that is that we are fragmented at this moment. We have different groups doing different things in isolation. We have Afro-Latino businesses doing their own thing as well. So we're not basically united as we would like to.
Another similarity.
That's right, exactly. And so the Ernesto Gamboa Project, one of the goals is basically to bring the Afro-Latino community together. And one of the things that we're doing is through the summit that we're putting together in April.
Oh, great, because I was just about to ask you about the summit. Yeah.
Right.
So let's talk about the summit too. Yeah, weave that in.
Yeah, and that is we getting together wonderful speakers. Many of them are from universities and individuals, businesses, and community organizers that will gather in Miami to really have a conversation of who we are as Afro-Latino and our identity. And this, we believe, will help some of the students, the Afro-Latino students, get education and get information about the culture, about the history that they may not receive in these centers of higher education. And so the Ernesto Gamboa Project, the initiative is to basically create a platform to bring professionals, bring educators, Afro-Latino educators, to come and talk about who we are as Afro-Latino, talk about the culture and educate people and start that conversation so that we can come together, so we can unite, come together as one people, and then we can move forward. When you ask the question in terms of how the Afro-Latinos and the African Americans can really work together, I think there are ways that we can do it, but there is no way that the African American community and the Afro-Latino community can come together until we as Afro-Latino get it together, and the African American community get it together. Then we can come together as one and present just one agenda. Right.
Because that's the ultimate hope. That's the ultimate hope. And even in that, as much as I agree with that, right? I do agree, right? We have to be able to come together as Africans from the continent, as Africans from the Caribbean, as Africans from Latin America, as Africans from America. We have to each be able to come together in order for all of us to be able to come together, which needs to happen ultimately, And at the same time, it's important for, us as we are able, for instance, you and I, across those dynamics, to come together even in small ways, to begin spreading, so I can come together with you and I can spread some Afro-Latino insights in my pocket. You can spread some African American, some Afro-Caribbean insights in your pocket, and we can do some cross-pollination to kind of plant the seeds for us to come together. And
Right.
that's the overarching hope. You know what I mean? We have to start thinking globally.
Of course.
As everything in the world goes globally, right? We have to start thinking globally. We were thinking, you and I were talking before this, y'all. I was talking with Orlando before this about the potential economies that exist when we start thinking globally, right?
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
look at for instance now, if you're an entrepreneur, if you know anything about entrepreneurism, y'all are probably hip to the fact that you can find somebody to do something for you overseas and pay them a good wage, and by their standards, a great wage by their standards, which is far below what you would pay somebody here. Because of the economy,
Right.
So I know, for instance, Ethiopian coffee farmers make $300 a year. I can pay a farmer like $1,000,
Yes.
and he's making a killing,
Yes. Exactly.
and I'm making a killing.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout Latin America, if we start to understand Afro-Latino culture, and we start to find out who's making the rums, who's teaching the dances, who's creating the crafts, who's sewing the dresses, designing the clothes, who's doing what, we too can begin to create that kind of economy where we are building them up in their communities, we're building ourselves in our communities, but we cannot do that unless we know, right?
Exactly, correct. And you made a very good point there. And I think one way that can help us really understand each other, if we create forum, if we create conferences in which we can come together, and the African American and the Afro-Latino community come together and really just try to teach each other, understand each other's culture, knowing our history, that we have a lot of things in common, more things that really brings us together than divide us. And once we get that point, I think we will be able to really change the agenda, change the narrative in this country.
Yeah, and I know that's one of the hopes for the summit that you have coming up, to bring together Afro-Latinos, primarily, yes, but not just Afro-Latinos, but to bring together Black folks who understand what we've been talking about, to be able to get more exposure to the richness and deepness of Afro-Latino culture, to establish some connections, to see opportunities for both politics and economics, for the building of the diaspora. And so I encourage you all to go to thegamboaproject.com. You go to the Gamboa, Gamboa, boa like boa constrictor. You go to the gamboaproject.com and you can find more information on the summit when it takes place. I know for those of y'all in the Northeast, I'm sure you would love to get down to Miami in April, and this will give you a good conscious excuse, a good woke excuse, as they say, to get down to Miami in April, and not just have a good time, but also get some food for your soul as well. So, Brother Orlando, before we start wrapping the show, any parting words, any insights, anything you feel that we need to share that wasn't shared that you want to share at this time?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to really share with you this little knowledge of the Afro-Latino community, and also for the project that is coming up, the summit. The summit basically it's we'll have a group of panelists there, people, professionals who will be addressing the issue of the Afro-Latino experiences. And there will be bloggers also there that will be getting together, talking about it, and hopefully writing about the summit. And this is the first time, it's the first event like this that we're putting together in Miami, bringing people from not only from Miami and Florida, but also from out of the state to come and really just share with us their knowledge of who we are, and hopefully begin drafting the Afro-Latino agenda for our community.
Amen, amen, amen. May the Lord bless that endeavor. May the Lord bless your work. Brothers and sisters, I want y'all to keep the conversation going with Orlando. Orlando is a member of the Blacks with Power group already, so you can join the group. Go to blackswithpower.com/Facebook. Try to keep it a safe space, so I make you go through a little tiny application process just to make sure that you're committed to actually finding solutions and forming connections and not just trolling folk. So blackswithpower.com/Facebook. Get into the group and let's have a conversation. If there's something more that you want to know because you haven't been exposed to Afro-Latino culture, didn't even really pay attention to the fact that there were black folks in Latin America. You want to know more about finding out about blacks in Honduras, finding out about blacks in Nicaragua and Venezuela and Cuba and Colombia, so on and so forth. I'm sure you can question Orlando and he can find the answers for you, and we can continue the dialogue that way. But a major question that I want to ask y'all, that I want to continue the conversation on, is what do you think would be the possibilities for forming strong connections with our Afro-Latino brothers and sisters? What possibilities do you see? Jump into the group, blackswithpower.com/Facebook, and pose your possibilities. I want to see what your visions are, what your ideas are, what your thoughts are. Be sure to like the Facebook page, facebook.com/blackswithpower. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, on Stitcher, Google Play, TuneIn, on YouTube. Listen to your previous episodes. Give a review, give a thumbs up, give a thumbs down. Let us know what you like, what you dislike, what you need more of, what you want less of. A charge to keep we have, brothers and sisters. A God to glorify. A never-dying soul to save and fit it for the sky. We have come a long way. All throughout the diaspora, we indeed as a people have accomplished a great deal. But brothers and sisters, we are not there yet. So let us march on till victory is won. Live with power.
Amen.